Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Meekins, for this opportunity. And guys, like I'm hanging in there because this is usually past my bedtime, but I'm gonna keep it real simple and real casual. And part of that is me being a college professor and liking to have people engage and just having a conversation. Background. I have a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in social work, and I have a PhD in higher education, leadership, and research. And basically I started out as a clinical social worker, and my background in that was for 23 years. Had a private practice for 20 years. Also had did field work, worked in school systems. And if anyone knows anything about social work, you're really doing a lot of what we would call qualitative research. Taking field notes, you're doing observations, depending on the different settings that you work in. You're constantly doing interviews, you're talking to people, and the whole goal is for you to better understand how that individual understands their life in their social setting. So it's a way for you to gather different types of information. I switched into academics around 2010, 2011, and mainly taught a lot of social work courses. But the course that I would always be tasked with teaching pretty much every semester would be research. And there was always this heavy push for students to do quantitative research. But again, as a social worker and having students that were going to be going out into the field, really helping them to understand the importance of qualitative research and how it can be used to better different systems and also to better the life of the clients that they will be working with. In 2016, I actually left academics for what I would call work trauma. And it was a trauma that pretty much I was experiencing sexual harassment, and I'm okay with talking about that now. And it was at that point that I made a conscious decision that no one else should have to go through what I had gone through in a professional setting and not having the support that I needed to get through that. And over the years, I saw myself working with women because I transitioned into business coaching. So I totally left the field of social work. Didn't leave research, but wasn't doing social work anymore and was doing some business coaching. And noticed that a lot of the clients that I was working with, all of them were leaving corporate America. In droves, and the individuals that I was working with were African American women, and they were just saying they were frustrated, they were tired of the unequal pay that they were receiving, they were tired of being overlooked for promotions. And at first I didn't see the theme that was emerging from this, but it was a recurring theme. And in 2020, when we had what I call the racial reawakening, where we had the murder of George Floyd, and we just kind of saw the whole world explode. On LinkedIn, I shared an experience in regards to like trauma and trauma that I had experienced in the workplace and how you have different triggers. And so I started to talk about that. And then I walked away from my phone, I walked away from my computer. And when I came back, it was like my DMs were flooded with information and stories from women telling me about their different experiences in the workplace. And so I was just like, okay, so what am I supposed to do with all of these stories? And at that time, I probably had self published like 5 or 6 books. So I am a published author. And so I decided that I would collectively start sharing their stories in an anthology. So the first anthology that I did was in 2020, and the title is "Shut 'Em Down: Black Women, Racism in Corporate America." And so it's 20 women, African American, who share their stories of like just microaggressions, the bias, the bullying, the being overlooked for jobs and for promotions. And they're all sharing their stories. And what we discovered was that a couple of things took place. They were giving permission to other women to start having conversations about what was taking place in the workplace and the unfair treatment of women that takes place. The other thing that I began to see was that these women also had other underlying issues that they had never resolved. And so that was like they had a compound effect taking place when it came to trauma. So, on top of experiencing trauma in the workplace, they also had trauma that they were experiencing from systemic racism, from just being Black. They were dealing with the traumas of generational trauma that can be passed down. In one particular instance, is slavery, that we know that Blacks never really recovered from the effects of slavery because therapy, like I always say, that it's not like they had therapists there when they told the slaves that they were free. And it was like, hey, let's process what you went through for the last 400 years. And so what has happened is that that trauma has been passed down from generation to generation and how you deal with certain situations on top of all of the stuff that they see on social media and just having this heightened fight, flight, or fear feeling of how they are functioning within society. So you take all of that, and then you have this individual that has to go into the workplace and function. And so it makes the way that they function a lot different than their counterparts in the same workspace. And so I saw that theme starting to occur. And then I was asked by several other women to do another anthology because they were like, we didn't get a chance to tell our story. And so in the next anthology, I think it was like 15 women who told their story. And again, the themes were still the same. And this anthology is everyday struggle. And so they're still talking about their struggles in the workplace. But I was like, okay, this is interesting. This is something that I'm seeing over and over again with this particular group of women. Whereas when I looked at like white women in corporate America, yes, they were experiencing trauma, but the traumas were how they dealt with the traumas were different. It was based on that work that I started to have corporations reach out to me and say, "Hey, we need to have like someone come in and interview our employees and we want to see what their experience is." Or they were getting ready to try and implement a change within a corporation and realizing that they needed the buy-in of of their employees. And when I say their employees, the individuals that they're looking for that buy-in from is usually leadership looking for the buy-in from what we call their frontline workers, or the individual contributors. And those are the people that are on the front line. They're the ones I call boots on the ground that makes it happen. And what we normally see take place in the workspace is that those are the individuals that are normally ignored, especially when decisions are going to be made, when there's a change that is going to take place. They are usually the last to know, and they're not asked, what do you think? How do you feel? Is usually this is what needs to take place. And they're usually hesitant and resistant because they weren't a part of the decision making process, but also because they usually know if it's going to work or not. And if it's not going to work, you're going to have a big problem. Like it's just not going to get implemented. And so going in and actually collecting their stories and starting to see that there were similar threads with them as well, and noticing that one of the common things that I would hear was that they would say like, no one has ever asked me how I felt about X, Y, and Z in my job, or they don't think that I'm smart enough to make decisions or to have a seat at the table, but we're the ones out here that's making it happen. And so what I found is that qualitative research has actually allows a company to hear the voice of what I call the voiceless, those who normally don't have a say so in the organization. And what I found is that when you give these individuals a voice, I've always found like there's this sense of relief that finally someone has listened to me. But you also, the company gets to see what's working, what's not working, and what are some changes that need to be made. But it's not coming from a top tier, like, top of the pyramid, so to speak, perspective, but we're starting at the bottom. We're starting with the people who are in the trenches and looking at it from their perspective. Um, so on a research agency that's called I Think Change, and it's in my agency, I employ other Black female researchers. And so they're quantitative and qualitative researchers. And so our focus is working with companies, going in, working with leadership. And I'm usually the one that goes in and does like the interviews, the focus groups, the observations. If I give a questionnaire, it's a questionnaire that they have to like write out their answers. So it's not where you're doing a Likert scale and it's A, B, or C. Like you have to, it's paragraph and you're putting your feelings into it. A lot of people like to look at qualitative research as if it is easy. And it's just like, oh, well, you're just interviewing people. And it's just like, well, yeah, no, it's not just you're interviewing people. You're doing a lot more than just speaking to people, but you're also looking for what are the common patterns. And you're usually going in with the specific question or a hypothesis that you have as the researcher in mind, and you want to see if your participants, if their lived experiences are what you thought it would be. You're also looking for things that are going to stand out, and sometimes, a lot of times, the things that I found as a qualitative researcher were usually things that I never saw occurring. I've had the opportunity to work with big tech companies. I've worked with tech organizations. I'm currently working with a nonprofit organization, and it's not cookie cutter. Everyone is different, everyone's needs are different. And looking at frontline workers is going to be different for each individual that I'm working with as well. When I'm doing an interview, sometimes it's I have to get them to warm up. And so we're making small talk and, I'm letting them tell me about themselves. Sometimes we'll go into the interview and I'll be like, I don't think I'm getting what I need. And so I'll say, okay, well, thank you. Those are all of my questions. And I'll find that once I say that, the floodgates open and then they start to really give me the information that I was looking for. Because at this point, they've started to relax. They felt they've gotten to know me. And so that I say that's like where the magic happens. Usually after I say, okay, that's it, thank you. And those are all of my questions. And I might say, like, do you have any questions? And then it's like the story that they really wanted to share starts to come out. And so sometimes I'll find that maybe the questions I thought were important weren't the questions that I needed that were going to give me the information that I was looking for. And so allowing them that space to just open up and to listen. And so being a qualitative researcher also requires you to have a lot of patience. I say the patience of Job, that you have to be very attentive. You have to have a lot of empathy. I have had participants to start crying in an interview. I've had some just to be very grateful again that for the first time in their entire career that they felt seen, they felt heard, and they felt validated. And I found that this information really helps companies to understand the people that work for them. It's numbers are good. Data is good when we're looking at numbers and percentages and we're trying, business analysis and budget analysis and all of that. But we have to understand that the people are important too. And if you don't understand what makes your employee tick, what is their why? What is their drive? Why are they coming to work every day? Why haven't they quit on you? And what are the challenges that they are facing? Sometimes the challenges could be something as simple as like they're autistic and you just have too much. There's too many distractions, there's too much noise, there's sensory overload for them, but no one is taking their disability into consideration. It could be the single mom who she's going to be 10 minutes late for work because she can't get her kids to the drop off at the school until a certain time because it's not open. So she has to wait. And so needing that flexibility versus just looking at, okay, she's just always late, she's never on time, she's not dependable, and that's not really what is going on. And so what I do is I capture all of that, me and my team, and then together we look and see like what are the recurring themes. And we also go and we do like a literature review. So we're doing a full-blown research report. So we have the literature that backs us up. And if we need like hard numbers for some of our reports, that's what the quantitative researcher will come in, and she will plug that information in for us. We provide references, we give a methodology. So it's pretty much like doing a mini dissertation for every client that I work with. Very intense, and it also can be kind of draining too, because again, you're listening to these personal stories of individuals. When you're doing an observation, we are actually in their workspace. So interviews I usually do via Zoom, but if I'm doing an observation, I'm actually at the organization. I'm in their environment, and so I'm watching how they interact with each other, how they interact with management, how are they interacting with customers? Is there a difference? I'm also looking at what are the demographics, and is diversity really taking place? Is there that inclusion? Are there people from different walks of life? And how are they interacting together? Because again, when we look at what qualitative research is, it's like I'm trying to understand what is their social reality? How are they functioning in their reality versus how we think they are functioning, which is how a lot of leadership and your managers or looking at things. So the work that I have done has actually been used in Women in Technology International. They have a report that they do that's called the glass ceiling, and it looks at women in technology. And what we found, the first study that they did, I think was like over 20 years ago, and there wasn't a qualitative piece. And so they brought me in this time around, and their data showed one thing. So the numbers showed one thing. But when I went in and did the qualitative piece, what we found was the stories and the emotions to back up the data that they had. We found that a lot of women who hit a certain age, so women who hit midlife, women who were considered a minority, usually never made it out of what we call the frontline worker or the individual contributor in tech, that they were stuck in these lower positions for 10, 20, sometimes 30 years. And that if they moved up, and that step was what we would call like the glass step, where they would get stuck in this lower position. If they moved up, the next position that they will move up to will be what we call a middle management position. And that was where they would hit the glass ceiling, where they wouldn't move up into like the C suite. But the numbers showed that only a few would progress into middle management, and it was almost none that were progressing into the C suite. And so the picture that management was painting was that, well, they were mothers and that they were single parents and that they didn't have support, or if they were moms, then they had to take care of their household duties, and so they didn't have the tenacity that it was going to take to be in management. And when I had the opportunity to speak with these ladies, they were like, no, that's not it. Like, I am overlooked for positions. I apply for positions. I have the certifications, I have the degrees, I have the trainings. I am not being promoted. It has nothing to do with my home life. I have the support that I need. As one of the tech workers told me, she said, "My husband is trained, so I have a lot of support at home. That is not the reason. I still don't understand why I have never been moved into management." I had one to tell me that when she went into a meeting to do a presentation, that when she sat down, the men in her like a notebook and a pen, and she was like, "What is this for?" And they were like, "Well, you're the note taker, right?" And she was like, "No, I'm the presenter." And they were just like, "But you're a woman." And so the biases that they constantly face, even though they were overqualified to do these positions that they were applying to do, really. And so really giving them a voice and shedding a light on what their experience was and what they were going through, but giving it from their perspective versus these assumptions that everyone had, that, oh, this is what they must be going through and this is why they aren't being promoted. It also showed the lack of accountability of how management was not taking accountability for their role and not making sure that these women were moved into different positions. They kept saying that they needed training and they needed mentorship. And the women were like, no, we don't need that. Like, I've had mentorship, I've had the training, I have the certifications. It is that I am just not being promoted. And so that report really shed light on what women are going through in the tech field today. What are the obstacles? What are the challenges from their perspective? And it's not numbers, it's their stories. And so as I write a report for a qualitative as a qualitative researcher, and I'm writing a report or a case study, I actually take their audio and I transcribe it. And when I find as I'm coding, I'm looking for things. And as I find quotes that support the things that I am looking for, I pull those quotes out. So when you're reading the report and I'm describing the different things and I'm giving you like the background of those things and how they take place in society, then I give you their experience. And so I'm tying it in to that company of, this is what your employees are saying. It's not what I'm saying, it's not what you're saying, but this is what your frontline workers are saying. This is what your middle management is saying. This is what they're saying are the issues. And these are the things that are recurring. These are the problems that are standing out that you need to address. And at the end of the report, as we do as in any type of research, I do go in and I give them suggestions on what they can do in the workplace to begin to correct the issues that we are seeing. But I also highlight if there were things that really stood out that were not problems, but that they said, this is something that I appreciate. This is a good thing. This is something that's really helping me in my career. So with the qualitative research, it really gives you, again, it gives you a clear, I think it gives you the emotional piece that sometimes research misses. It gives your research a voice. So your participants actually are speaking on paper, and I think it brings it to life. And I think I enjoy qualitative research because I am an author. I've just released my ninth book 2 weeks ago, which focuses on Black women healing from workplace trauma. And so when I talk about qualitative research, it has not only informed the work that I do, like guess you could say my 9 to 5 with my research agency, but it also informs like the books that I write, that I produce, that again tell stories, but also offer solutions on what individuals can do to begin to heal in the workplace, how management can begin to come in and provide support for those individuals. And it's not just based on hard numbers. Now you get to hear their emotions, you get to read their emotions, you get to feel what they are feeling too. And for me, that has been the most impactful part of my work, of bringing their stories to life and giving them an opportunity to share what they've gone through and still protecting their identity and leaving out that information where someone might be able to figure out who they are. So it's definitely takes a certain skill set to do what I do. It's taken some years to get here, but I am here and I enjoy every minute of it. So does anyone have any questions? I know I just talked and talked and talked.
Don't normally show up on the screen myself, but why not? All right, so let's go. We'll go ahead and go through the questions. So if you have more questions in the chat, please feel free to ask. You can just follow up as we go. So I'll go ahead and jump straight into them. We got a number here. So the first one is, how does your background in social work inform your current research methodology or understanding?
So as a social worker, you're working with people for like from different cultures and different backgrounds. And so
Hmm.
a lot of people, when they think about social work, they think it as child protection and you're taking people's kids.
Right.
And so social workers do a whole lot more than that. So I have worked with families who had children with disabilities. I've worked in school systems. I've done case management.
Okay.
And I was a social worker that went out into the field. So I usually did home visits, required me to do interviews, listening, observations, especially a lot of observations in the school system. So you're really doing qualitative research because you need all of that information when you're preparing a case to say if a child qualifies for a disability, should a child be put in special education, should a child remain in the home, or
Yep.
should that child be put into foster care. Like you have to have the documentation and it has to tell a story. As one judge told me when I was sitting in court, he was like, I don't want to hear from you. Just give me the case and I'm going to read the case. And the case needs to tell me a story. And if it doesn't tell me a story, you're in trouble. And so when he read it, he was like, okay, the child can go back to their mom based on the
Hmm.
information that was in the case. And so you have to be very thorough
Hmm.
and you have to pay attention to like the small details. And that is really a big part of qualitative research, is not just recording their stories but looking at their body language and knowing when to ask another question when you kind of sense that they're being hesitant. And so really being in tune with each individual that you are coming in contact with.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I can see where being able to like you said, sort of read that body language probably is a big help when
Hmm.
people aren't, when they're kind of uncertain about whether they should really divulge the what they're actually feeling, what they're thinking, that kind of thing. That I can see where that'd be a huge help, especially for what you're doing now.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
very important.
Let's see. Based on your experience, do the types of microaggressions and bias differ based on geographical location or position within the company? So, like you talked about lower level workers, the frontline workers versus people that are higher up middle management or C suite, somewhere, or whatever the equivalent of that is.
No, they usually the type of microaggression or just bias or discrimination
Hmm.
it doesn't change from what position you're in.
Hmm.
The intensity might change a little
Okay.
bit because of who you're coming in contact with.
Hmm.
And so if you're more in contact with management, I found that like those in middle management tend to get more of those microaggressions, the bullying, the harassment. Those who are the frontline workers might experience it, but they're gonna be the least to tell because they're usually, I need my job. And
Oh,
so
I got you. Okay.
yeah. And so if they're going through something, they're going to be very hesitant to open up and share. And so interviewing them is where you really have to be delicate
Hmm.
because usually they have never shared what they are going through and they are swearing you to secrecy that you are not going to tell who they were. No one's going to
Right.
figure out who they were.
Yeah.
Because if it's found out by management, usually their situation becomes 5 times
Oh,
worse.
sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The retaliation, I could see. I mean, to me, that seems like it would be the hardest part in trying to
Yes.
get them to speak. Is they're gonna, like you said, they're worried about not not being able to keep their job, which they need to sustain themselves, their families. Okay.
Yes. So they're but yeah, the types don't change.
Okay.
The intensity, the closer you get into upper management, I've seen that those women experience more.
That's interesting. I would have guessed kind of a little. I mean, I guess it makes sense in this in terms of the fact that as they go higher up, there are less people like them because of the bias that has historical bias and well, and current day bias still, unfortunately. But I guess, yeah, I can see that it's interesting that it doesn't change even as they get more power themselves. It's almost like it's compensated by the people saying, "Wait, you shouldn't be here."
Right.
Right. Okay. Terrible.
Yes.
Uh, how do you convert employee responses to data without losing the context and nuance of their answer?
And so the way that I do that is with the help of technology. So all of their interviews are recorded. And so with the help of Zoom, I can actually have the audio and the video. But I usually extract the audio from it. And
Mm-hmm.
if like for one company, they wanted the video for some other stuff,
Okay.
and the participants signed consent forms if they wanted their video to be used. And if they said no, once I extracted the audio,
Mm-hmm.
I deleted the video to protect their identity. And
Okay.
then from there, I usually put it into a system that transcribes it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't use the software that they have to do to actually go in and do the coding because you still actually are manually coding it anyway.
Okay.
Once I get the transcript, I print it out and I actually go through. And because I have it on audio, I
Mm-hmm.
can listen and read at the same time.
Okay.
And I'm looking for themes. And so I'm old school. I got different color
Yeah,
highlighters.
yeah, yeah. No, that's a great way.
And so I'm writing down what am I constantly hearing? And as I hear those themes, then I go back in and start looking for those themes
Mm-hmm.
within the interviews and I highlight those and I extract exactly what they said. So
Okay.
I don't go in and change any of their language. So I just go in and cut and paste
Mm-hmm.
what they're saying that fits the themes, and then I
Right.
plug them into where the different themes are.
Okay. That's a great way to do it. Let's see. So you talked about kind of how you go in with the hypothesis about what the issue is. Has there ever been one where you went in and it ended up being maybe way off base? Not necessarily that you were wrong, but maybe like that the what you thought might be causing the issue wasn't actually it, but it was something else entirely different that you hadn't thought about.
Right. So one instance where I did do that where there was gatekeeping that was taking place.
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't see it that way. They
Mm-hmm.
saw their environment as so they did I guess they ignored the gatekeeper. So
Okay.
they were like the gatekeeper wasn't an issue. And for
Ah.
them, they felt that their the themes coming up were not issues. The themes that came up was like, it feels like a family. I feel supported. And
Mm-hmm.
so we saw this thing. And that's a good
Sure.
environment.
Yeah.
And so, and if the gatekeeper was mentioned, it was briefly, and so the gatekeeper was a thing, but the
Hmm.
gatekeeper wasn't the overall. Like, overall, it was like, it's a family environment. They're supportive. They've helped me, they've encouraged me. It was
Hmm.
just like, mentoring. And so you saw all of this support that was taking place.
Yeah.
Where going in, we thought the issue was gonna be of, people being prohibited from moving forward, that
Okay.
gatekeeper that was taking place, and they didn't see that as the issue.
Interesting. Okay. Let's see. What's an effective tactic or maybe tactics for convincing the higher ups of genuine issues?
Usually,
Yeah, I know. Nice, easy question, right? Yeah.
right, right. I will say this: there usually is no convincing.
Hmm.
If I am contacted, it is because they see a need,
Okay.
and they're bringing me and my team in to, because they what they have done hasn't worked.
Okay.
And so they're like, okay, well, let's try this, what you behavioral people are talking about. And let's see what you do. You do interviews. Okay, then we'll help you get some people to talk to. Like, they don't really understand, but it's just like,
Hmm.
what we've done hasn't worked. So
Okay.
we're gonna try this. But rarely, I would say it's few and far
Hmm.
between. Unfortunately, a lot of what me and my team has seen taking place is that when we are contacted, it is for a company to check a box to say that they reached out to a
Okay.
double minority because we're Black women,
Sure.
and then we don't get the contract.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's. I guess that's not even surprising, honestly. But yeah.
Yeah, but when we do get the ones that reach out, and it's usually, hey, I've read your anthologies,
Mhm.
I've followed you on social media, and this is what we're trying to do. And I'll say, yeah, we can do it. And it's usually like, okay, so when can we start? Like,
Yeah.
so they're ready to, there is no convincing them.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess that's the one that is a good thing. Like, if they're actually wanting to do the work, then that's
Right, but
good.
if they don't want to do it,
Yeah.
they're usually not going to even reach out to us to come in and work with them.
Okay. Let's see. So I guess I guess this is almost along the same lines. Have you had any pleasant surprises in terms of a company or leadership actually taking results to heart and implementing useful changes? Maybe you weren't expecting them to, and they actually came around and did what was right, I guess.
Yeah, like, we one organization that we worked with, we went in and we're very honest. And
Hmm.
so we had one organization to contact us, and they wanted to micromanage.
Hmm.
And we were just like, no, no, no. We have this,
Hmm.
like, we all have PhDs,
Yeah.
like, we have behavioral
Yeah.
backgrounds, we're from behavioral sciences. We kind of know what we're doing.
Yeah.
We don't need you to micromanage us. And then it was just like, well, we need to know what you're doing and who you're talking to. And we were like, that's not how this works.
Right.
And
That's not.
that's not how this works,
Yeah.
because you're a scientist too. So
Hmm.
no, that's not how this works. And so, actually writing, giving at the end, saying, this is what we found.
Hmm.
And they were just like, oh, like, that's interesting. And it was just like, well, what should we do? And giving them like, this, and this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
A, B, and C. Like, and they were like, well, we thought it was this. And okay. I know what you thought, but this is what these people have said they would like to see happen
Yeah.
in the company. This is what your employees are saying.
That's awesome.
And so getting them is usually, when we think about companies, is management trying to get the front level workers and individual
Hmm.
contributors to buy in.
Yeah.
But when we do our research, it's us trying to get management to buy in to what their individual contributors and frontline workers are saying.
Yeah.
These are the problems that y'all need to fix.
I mean, that's good though, because like, I mean, it's I guess sometimes it takes a third party saying, no, seriously, this is the problem right here.
Right, just look at it.
Yeah.
This is what they're saying. We're not making this up. These are the quotes. This is what the data is saying.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and sometimes I think it does take that third party to come in.
I can see that. I can see where it'd be hard for somebody to admit themselves that they're not doing something right, but when somebody else comes in and says, "Yeah, okay, seriously." Uh,
Definitely.
let's see. Uh, how do we avoid our own bias in qualitative research? It feels all too easy to steer a conversation in the direction of what I'd want to hear or what I already have a theory on. What guardrails keep interviews honest and provide surprising information?
I think for us, what keeps our interviews honest, and that keeps the bias out of it is that when I develop the questions, my questions usually stem from quantitative research that's already been done. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking at data that has already been collected either through the company or through the quantitative researcher that we have. And then we sit down together and review the questions. So it's not just me saying, oh, these are my questions and I'm going in.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually look and say, like, oh, well, maybe not phrase it like that. Maybe let's try this approach. And like, oh, maybe just leave that question out altogether. So the questions go through a review process to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that they are not biased. And usually, because I'm looking for something that's stemming from some other data that's been collected,
Mm-hmm.
it's usually not just me saying, oh, well, this is what I want to hear.
Right.
It's like, this is a pattern that we're seeing based on a survey that we've done,
Yeah.
and policies and procedures, or the number of people that have quit the organization. So we're looking at stuff like that and saying, okay, well, let's find out what happened right here. Like, no one I want to know what happened here. And so one instance was, I wanted to know, like, why have you worked at a job for 20 years and you've never worked in management? Like, you've been at the same company for
Yeah.
20 years and you've been in the same position and you've never worked in management.
Yeah.
What's your story?
Yeah. Okay.
And just sitting back and letting them tell me their story. And it's just like, and it's usually a interesting
I
story.
would imagine so. Yeah. Oh my goodness. So, when a company that actually wants to work with you, so not one of the ones that's just checking a box, when they reach out to you and they actually want to work with you, what kind of information do they come to you with typically? Do they come and say, like, do they have a specific thing that they come to you with, or do they kind of say, hey, we think there's this general problem, are we right? Or is it
Ye-
something like they'll say, like, okay, we've had five employees leave in the last year, all of them were black women. That seems weird. you know is it, or is there something, is it just how it happened to go?
It's usually a combination. So
Mm-hmm.
some will say, we need a report for X, Y, and Z. So
Okay.
we have one company that they needed, like, the one organization we work with, they were doing an update of a report they already had done,
Mm-hmm.
and they needed to bring in a qualitative piece.
Okay.
And so they knew exactly what they needed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they didn't know what I did. Somebody told them they needed a qualitative researcher. So I had to go in, explain what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of, I had to sit through some of their meetings to
Mm-hmm.
figure out what exactly were the issues. I had to look at their data and then say, okay, this is what I think we need to, these are two, like, they're glaring. They're
Yeah.
looking at us. Let's find out what these workers are experiencing,
Yeah.
and what's their story. And they were like, okay, then I have another agency that reached out and they wanted one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they sent us a sample of something else. And we were just like, that's not the same thing. Like, those are two different things.
Yeah.
And then we had to say, and what you're saying you need, that's research. What you're showing us, like, that's a glorified book report that is like some pretty
Mm-hmm.
graphs, and like, that's that's not what we do.
Right.
Like, and so having to clarify what is, because some people think that, just like, if you put some charts and graphs, that you did research, and
Right.
we're just like,
A
no,
little, little more than
there's a
that.
little bit more than that.
Yeah.
Like, no. And so explaining to companies that sometimes we might not be a good fit for them for what it is that they're looking for. So sometimes they, like, don't know, or they're saying the wrong thing.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, I can see the educational aspect would probably be very much needed for, I'm sure, a lot of companies.
Yes, it is. It is.
So in your experience, do you see a difference in the treatment between, say, black men and black women? I mean, I imagine there's at least some overlap based on racial bias and microaggressions based on race, but um, are there any? I mean, what's the when you, if you compare the two, what do you see there?
So actually, when you look at the two, there is some overlap, but black women have it harder than black men.
Hmm.
And so black men are actually they're going to, I guess, elevate more and move through they can move through a company quicker than a
Okay.
black woman can move through the company.
Hmm.
Sometimes we've also found where black men and other black women who have moved up into management positions
Hmm.
actually become the bully, or they become the person
Oh,
that's dishing out the microaggressions.
interesting.
We've seen that happen as well. But when it comes to like pay, black men make more than black women,
Hmm.
and they're promoted over black women as well.
Interesting. In the case of the bullying that you just mentioned, is it that the people that have been promoted have internalized it, where like what they experience, and they kind of, is it like a, I had to go through this, so you do too, or?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a combination of some of it is kind of like what we would call hazing in
Hmm.
college. Like where it's like, well, I went through this, so
Yeah.
if you're trying to get where I'm at, you got to go through this as well.
Hmm.
And in their minds, they believe that that's what you do because that's what they went through.
Okay.
And that's what management made them go through. And so that's how we roll. That's what
Yeah.
happens. Other times it's a combination of that, plus they have their own unresolved traumas that they
Hmm.
have not dealt with. And so it's a buildup of bitterness and frustration and anger, and they're lashing out at the people who work beneath them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. Have you found lessons that transfer across most organizations? Are there ongoing structures or processes that could have avoided lots of the problems that you've discovered?
Oh, yeah. Like there are a lot of processes that they could have did.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it from what we see is like how people are promoted within a company.
Mm-hmm.
That sometimes there really isn't like a policy. Like there's a policy in place, but it's not being enforced. And
Okay.
so it's being left up to individual managers. And then one thing that we found is that managers they're recycled. They're coming in and out, and they're usually, when we're going up to upper management, they're bringing in people from other organizations. So like we see
Mm.
it happen a lot where someone from Google goes to Microsoft, or someone from Microsoft goes to Meta. And
Yeah.
so they're still in tech, but they're just going to a different tech company. But that doesn't mean that the work culture at one company is the same at another
Mm.
company. And so what is happening is that individual comes in and they start making decisions, and sometimes those decisions aren't a good fit for the work culture that is in place. And so having, like, I think that's where we see like the promoting within
Mm-hmm.
really helps, because you have someone who's already familiar with the work culture, with the process. They're not having to get acclimated to everything and everyone.
Yeah.
Just policies and procedures that they have that might be outdated, that they have not even looked at.
Mm-hmm.
um Other things that we found is just like team meetings, sitting down, having one-on-ones with those with your subordinates, those who work underneath you.
Yeah.
Like simple things that I think sometimes we take for granted in certain organizations do not happen
Hmm.
as you get into like these bigger companies.
Interesting.
And so people are just like, they're there and they're workers, but no one is saying, hey, like, I noticed you came in late. Is everything okay?
Yeah.
Instead of just jumping on their case,
Right.
or saying, like, hey, you did a good job. Like, thanks for contributing that. Like,
Yeah.
praising them and letting them know, like, I see you and I hear you. Those are the things that, like, we found that frontline workers are missing is that
Yeah.
they aren't validated. It's just like no one asks us how they're doing. If they
Yeah.
were out sick, no one says, well, hey, glad to see you back at work. You're feeling better. Like
Yeah.
simple stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a good point to bring up. I guess along those same lines, are there, or I guess, yeah, are there policies that you see implemented a lot that lead to, or maybe enable bias to happen? That it's not an intentional thing, right? It's not a policy that's written to purposefully be biased, but end up enabling that bias to happen, whether it's on purpose or not.
Yeah, a great example is like job descriptions.
Hmm.
And so like they'll have a job description and it say you must be able to lift 50 pounds.
Yeah.
But the job description is you need me to be a researcher. Why do I need to lift 50 pounds?
Right.
Like, and I'm looking at numbers and I'm talking to
Yeah.
people. And so like for someone who might have a disability, that would either automatically disqualify them, especially if you have like a recruiter or someone who's doing the interviewing
Mm-hmm.
that's actually going down the checklist, and they might not
Right.
say, oh, well, can you lift 50 pounds? But they're like, oh, they're in a wheelchair. Well, no, I don't think they're going to be able to. And so it
Yeah.
automatically becomes a factor that they're using to eliminate people
Okay.
versus realizing you just need to take that off the job description. It doesn't
Right.
even go with the job description. And so having like outdated job descriptions that automatically are disqualifying people
Mm.
who otherwise would have made great employees.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great example. um, so I guess maybe we'll. If anybody has any more questions they want to get in, please feel free to do so. I'll go ahead. I'll ask one last sort of maybe larger question. So you've given some great examples of the problems that you've seen in large companies, small companies, everywhere in between. In general, what are some of the things that, like, I help run a research lab, so I have undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs that I work with. What are some general policies or strategies that someone like me could use to try and address unconscious bias that I have? I try and be conscious of biases that I've grown up with, from South Carolina. So uh, as a white guy, that I had a lot of other white guys that were very racist. But what kind of things can someone like me do or be cognizant of to at least try and fight that internal bias that likely exists?
I, I always say this. It's just like get to know the people that work with you.
Hmm.
Like and when I say get to know them, like have conversations with them. And
Hmm.
when you have a question, ask. Like, and normally people who are different, because like my last name is Yazeed. And
Hmm.
so like I've had people make jokes like about being a Muslim. And I will say, yeah, I'm Catholic. Like I'm not Muslim.
Yeah.
Like it's the yes, the last name, and so I'll explain
Hmm.
why my last name is the way it is, and they'll
Yeah.
just be like, "But you're Catholic." Yes, I'm Catholic, but
Yeah.
I have a Muslim last name,
Yeah.
and so, but you're making an assumption
Hmm.
about me, and so it. But I'll take it lighthearted. Like let's have a conversation
Sure.
about it. And so I think being open to us having conversations that we might feel are difficult,
Hmm.
but sometimes the other person really appreciates you at least taking the time out to get to know them
Yeah.
and to ask and allow them the opportunity to explain, and say like, hey, I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
We truly appreciate it. But I think ignoring it, and not addressing our own issues,
Hmm.
they become bigger issues.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I really appreciate you giving this talk. It was very informative. It was really, like I said, it's really cool to see how you use the qualitative research to try and make the world a better place. Basically, that's fantastic. So thank you again, and thank you to everybody for the great questions. Um, Dr. Z, if I could get you to hang on for just 1 second, we'll talk real quick. Um,
Okay.
and then I'll let you get to bed, I promise. So thank you again to everybody for coming out, and I hope you enjoyed the talk as much as I did. And I think we'll be back next week. Let me double check and see. Maybe not. We'll see. Hopefully, try and get somebody to talk next week. But if not, definitely the week after that. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Please stay safe.